Pokemon has a number of field moves that are used to navigate and solve puzzles in the overworld. Most of these are not particularly complex and involve just using a move once to get past an obstacle. Waterfall is a perfect example. There's a waterfall in the way, you use Waterfall, you have passed the waterfall. Some of them, however, are a bit more complicated. Strength in particular involves pushing boulders out of the way to get past obstacles or solve puzzles. I have opinions about the boulder puzzles, as they are referred to, because of how variable they are in the earlier Pokemon games. They tailed off around Generation 5, but before that point, managed to confound and obstruct many a child playing the games. Let's start with the first boulder puzzle that most people probably completed. The Victory Road puzzle in Red and Blue. Yes, I know that the puzzle in the Seafoam Islands is technically accessible first, but most people probably completed the Victory Road puzzle first, and it is not a great introduction to the concept. The base idea is that you need to use strength to push the boulders onto the buttons on the cave floor. Once you have done so, the barriers blocking you from progressing further through the cave will open, and you can go to the next room. It's not a bad idea, and it established a format for later games. However, the execution leaves a bit to be desired. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, some of the boulders were placed extremely far away from the buttons that they are meant to be on top of, without much thinking required to figure out where they need to go. So you just end up holding left on the D-pad for what feels like 15 minutes until the boulder gets to the other side of the room. It's not particularly fun. I do like that most of these puzzles are kind of unassuming. You can see the target, and you can see the boulder. How hard could it be? But it's quite easy to forget what you're doing and push the rock in one wrong direction, and then it's stuck in a corner. You then have to exit the room and reset the position of the boulder and start over again. It teaches the player to think before they push and be careful with their movement as they are pushing. Like I said, it's not a particularly good example, but it's hard to hate Victory Road too much, since Generation 1 generally tends to get some slack for being held together with duct tape. Also, you can swag boulder. Of the two boulder puzzles in Generation 1, the Seafoam Island puzzle is the better of the two in my opinion. It does not involve tediously pushing boulders in a straight line for eternity. It's also a bit harder in my view, and is easier to mess up. If I have one criticism, it's that I wish there was more. I think the dynamics between the fast-moving current and the boulders blocking the water, making it passable, is really interesting. But in this case, you push two boulders into two holes and you're done. Congratulations, catch your Articuno and get out of here. Maybe people disagree with me here, I'm not sure. But I like this one and I want more puzzles like it. Obviously it reappears in Fire Red and Leaf Green, but it's pretty much the same there. The Ice Path puzzle in Generation 2 is perhaps the puzzle that got the most kids stuck back in the day. The problem here is that it combines two different kinds of puzzles, and it is a required cave to pass through in order to progress through the game. You both have to push the boulders through the right holes and then also navigate a sliding ice puzzle that is much larger than the number of tiles shown on screen, by a significant factor. You cannot see the entire room on your screen, meaning you have to figure out the straight line paths you need to take while moving across the ice. And while a lot of people did struggle with it, or at least that I know of, it's not as complex as it seems. The boulders in the upper level are actually allocated to specific holes, meaning you cannot push one boulder into a hole intended for another. They will get stuck in a corner before you can do that. The other thing is that you actually only need to push one boulder into a hole before you can successfully get to the middle section and take the ladder down to the next level. What I like here is that if you were a kid and couldn't really figure out how to get through, even after pushing the one necessary boulder through the hole, pushing the other three boulders makes the puzzle easier, as you can successfully slide to the next ladder from more points in the lower room. Watching people do this fast on the bike is super impressive and satisfying as well. If players didn't get enough boulders from the ice path, there's good news ahead, as you have to do a puzzle to get to the last gym leader, Claire, whose gym has lava instead of ice and trainers in the way instead of sliding into a corner as a hazard. This one really isn't too hard. I like that it has bait boulders, where pushing them down a hole actually doesn't help you progress in the slightest, but still gives the appearance of possibly being a solution. You can push the first boulder down the hole, drop down, see that if only you could push one more down beside it, you would be able to reach Claire, and then go back upstairs only to find that the second boulder is pressed against the wall, meaning that moving it down the hole is impossible, and you'll actually need to find another way around. Unfortunately, the rest of the gym is pretty paint by the numbers for a boulder puzzle. There's a slightly misleading set of boulders at the bottom, but nothing else really notable to speak of. Hoenn supplied some more good boulder puzzles, before they kind of dipped away in Generation 4. The main ones I think about here are the ones in the seafloor cavern, since they're required for the completion of the game, and are also completely distinct from the puzzles in Generation 1 and 2. There are no buttons to depress or holes to push boulders through, only a mass of rocks in a specific formation that can be passed if they are moved in the right way. One of them is also an optional path, where the player is given a choice between fighting a double battle against some grunts or doing the puzzle. I have to imagine most people just chose to do the puzzle since it's relatively easy and resetting the room if you make an error is pretty quick. There are two of them here as well. There aren't really any other puzzles of this nature in Hoenn, although there are plenty of boulders. There is one really cool puzzle in the Tanobi ruins in the Sevi Islands. It's the same kind of puzzle as that in Victory Road, but it looks slightly different. I think this puzzle works well and better than the one in Victory Road, because it relies on moving the boulders within a very constrained space to solve the puzzle. It also cannot be partially completed like the one in the ice path to get the reward. You have to get a boulder into each of the craters in order to solve the puzzle. The reward is the release of the unknown in Tanobi Chambers. It's not much, but in my view is the perfect use of a boulder puzzle. A unique side area with a specific reward for completion. It's not super easy either. Before making this video, I had not completed it in probably 12 years, and it took me more than a couple of attempts before I figured out the solution. I do have one possibly controversial opinion here when talking about Generation 4, and that's that I actually really don't care for the boulder puzzles in the Distortion World in Sinnoh. It's not that they shouldn't be there, it's that they totally wasted the Distortion World's potential for a good boulder puzzle. The puzzles there are incredibly conventional, basically on a par with the Victory Road puzzle in Generation 1, but they should be way more than that. Why didn't they utilize the distorted physics to have the boulders float upwards with some kind of opposite gravity, or have them fizzle out of existence amongst each other like some of the other obstacles do? We're told in-game that this is a place where normal physics don't apply as much, where things are twisted and weird. And yet, the rocks we push around the place to make our way further down behave exactly the same. It's not that it's a terrible puzzle or anything, but there was just so much more that they could have done here, and that's a real shame, I think. There are also not really any other substantive boulder puzzles in the rest of Generation 4 and 5. There are still plenty of boulders in Sinnoh, but they tend to be singular obstacles rather than puzzles with any complexity. In Generation 5, the boulders were rejigged to always be a permanent obstacle. They get pushed into holes, and they stay in that hole even when you exit and re-enter the area. Unlike in previous generations, where they are reset. The system was also maintained for the most part in Generation 6. There is one kind of cool puzzle in Kalos on Route 10 that exploits the size of the boulders against a more normal-sized rock on the ground. A similar kind of puzzle exists in some of the ruins in Alola, but they're not really the same caliber of puzzle as those that exist in Generations 1 to 3. There are a series of movable boulders that I will quickly address, but don't think merit being called puzzles, mostly due to being too short and containing too few possible solutions. I'm not sure if people will agree with me, but I don't think having a narrow path to push one boulder down, or pushing a boulder slightly out of the way, counts as a puzzle. The best thing about the boulder puzzles is that they evoke actual puzzles. They resemble puzzle cubes or sliding wood puzzles, while also being a genuine barrier to the player progressing. The games are pretty easy to brute force your way through most of the time, but the boulder puzzles slow you down, make you think, and do things a bit more deliberately than you would have otherwise. If you don't, you'll probably push a boulder into a corner and have to reset the room. I don't think that logic really applies to, say, the fiery path in Generation 3. I get the sense that this is one area where some people think that the potential of the mechanic has not been fully realized. Browsing around for information about boulder puzzles led me to dozens of instances of ROM hacks and fan projects featuring significantly more difficult and ambitious strength puzzles. A lot of these may not actually be that fun, or at the very least would be far too hard for children who can barely read to solve, but the sheer number of them suggests to me that this is something that people liked, and wanted far more of in earlier games that they were in. I think that boulder puzzles are neat, but they were somewhat underutilized when they were in the games, and have now petered out entirely as Pokemon moves to a 3D, non-grid based world. That's fine, but very little has replaced this puzzling as newer games have been released. I kind of wish that there was a little more in the way of puzzles in later games. Not necessarily boulder puzzles, though I do enjoy them. But obviously Nintendo has other franchises that have significantly more puzzle-heavy mechanics, so I kind of get why they'd want some separation. But still, Pokemon puzzles are good. That's all I had, folks. Tell me, did you ever get really stuck with one of these puzzles? Did you, on the contrary, find them really easy? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, it helps the channel out a bunch. Give me a follow on Twitch if you want to chat between videos and see some speedruns. Thanks for watching.